Spain is one of Europe's most visited countries. Every year, 96 million people come here. It's home to almost 50 million people and world-famous cities such as Madrid and Barcelona. But what if I told you it has a massive region, twice the size of Belgium, that is almost completely empty? Western Europe is famous for its crowded cities and centuries of development. So why is this region the exact opposite? And how has Spain's capital, Madrid, actually made the problem worse? This is mapped out, and this is the geographic story of the heart of Spain. If you ask someone to point to the emptiest place in Europe, they'd probably choose somewhere in northern Scandinavia, perhaps even the Scottish Highlands. Spain probably wouldn't even cross their mind. But right in the centre of the country lies one of Europe's emptiest regions. Known as the Serranía Celtibérica, this vast region stretches across parts of Aragon, Castilla-La Mancha, Castilla y León, and the Valencian community. Combined, it covers more than 65,000 square kilometres. Yet despite sitting in the heart of one of Europe's largest economies, fewer than 2 people per square kilometre live here. Across Spain as a whole, the average is nearly 50 times higher. It's comparable to some of the emptiest regions of Alaska and northern Canada. Spaniards even have a nickname for it, Spanish Lapland. And that's what makes this place so unusual. This isn't Siberia or the Sahara Desert. It isn't hidden away on some remote island. It's surrounded by major cities. Madrid lies to the west. Valencia sits just beyond the mountains to the east. Millions of people live only a couple of hours away. Yet somehow, this enormous region has become one of the emptiest places on the continent. The answer seems obvious. The land is simply too difficult to live on, too mountainous, too dry. But that explanation quickly falls apart, because people have actually lived here in large numbers for thousands of years. The Romans built roads through these mountains. Entire communities survived here for centuries. Clearly, people once saw something worth staying for. So if people managed to live here for generations, why did they suddenly stop? To answer that, we first need to understand why the geography of the heart of Spain is unlike almost anywhere else in Western Europe. If you fly over Spain, one thing quickly becomes obvious. This isn't a country dominated by flat coastal plains. Instead, much of its interior sits on a vast elevated plateau known as the Meseta Central, surrounded and divided by some of Europe's oldest mountain ranges. The Serranía Celtibérica lies where many of those mountains collide. Unlike the fertile Mediterranean coastline or the broad valleys of the Ebro and Guadalquivir rivers, this landscape is rugged, broken, and unexpectedly high. Many towns here sit more than 1,000 meters above sea level, making it one of the highest inhabited regions in the whole of Europe. That elevation changes everything. Summers here are hot and dry. Winters are freezing and battered by winds sweeping across the plateau. Locals even have a saying about the climate: 9 months of winter and 3 months of hell. For centuries, that climate dictated almost every aspect of life. Growing crops was difficult. The rocky limestone soils were thin and far less productive than the rich agricultural land surrounding Spain's major rivers. Water was often unreliable, and the mountains made travelling between settlements slow and expensive. Unlike Northern Europe, where rivers naturally linked towns together, these mountains did the opposite. They isolated them. Villages developed in narrow valleys, separated by ridges that were difficult to cross for much of the year. From a purely geographic perspective, this region was never an easy place to build large cities. But here's what's interesting. Despite all of those disadvantages, people still came. They farmed these valleys, raised livestock across the high plains, and built communities that survived generation after generation. The geography made life difficult, but if geography was the real problem, why did this region remain populated for so long? Geography alone can't explain why this region emptied out. Something else changed. and to find it, we have to leave the mountains and follow the people. Despite its harsh geography, the Serranía Celtibérica remained home to hundreds of thousands of people for centuries. Life wasn't easy. Families survived through a mixture of farming and livestock. Villages were small, isolated, and largely self-sufficient because almost everyone depended on the land. For generations, that balance remained remarkably stable. So what changed? It wasn't a drought, and it wasn't because the mountains suddenly became any steeper. Instead, the turning point came during the middle of the 20th century, when Spain completely transformed the way its economy worked. Following the devastation of the Civil War, much of Spain remained poor and overwhelmingly rural. But by the late 1950s, the Franco government abandoned decades of economic isolation and launched an ambitious program of industrial development. Factories and manufacturing centres were concentrated around Madrid, Barcelona, Zaragoza, and the Mediterranean coast. At exactly the same time, Spain's tourism industry exploded. Millions of tourists arrived every year, creating huge demand for hotels, restaurants, construction, and transport along the coast. Then everything changed. Almost overnight, the country's economic centre of gravity shifted away from the mountains and towards its cities. And for places like the Serranía Celtibérica, that was the beginning of the end. For the first time in history, young people had another choice. Instead of spending their lives farming rocky hillsides, they could earn higher wages in factories around Madrid. Instead of tending livestock in isolated villages, they could work in Barcelona or along Spain's rapidly growing Mediterranean coast. One by one, they left. At first, that wasn't unusual. People have always moved in search of better opportunities, but this migration was different. It wasn't just a few families. Between the 1950s and 1970s, millions of Spaniards left the countryside during what became known as El Éxodo Rural, the rural exodus. And while people moved from villages across Spain, regions like the Serranía Celtibérica were hit harder than almost anywhere else. Geography had protected these communities for centuries, but modern Spain no longer rewarded isolation, it punished it. The farms were less productive, the villages became smaller, competing against booming cities was almost impossible. But something even more damaging was happening. The people leaving weren't retirees, they were young adults. The very people who would have started businesses, raised families, built homes and had children. Once they left, they rarely came back. And that's when the decline stopped being temporary, it became permanent. Because when a village loses its youngest generation, it doesn't just lose people, it loses its future. But losing people wasn't actually the biggest problem. The biggest problem was what happened after they left. Because villages don't just disappear overnight. Once enough young families leave, there simply aren't enough children to keep the local schools open. And when the schools close, the next generation of parents have very little reason to stay. Soon afterwards, the local grocery shop struggles to survive, the pharmacies close, the village doctor retires, bus services become less frequent, eventually they disappear altogether. One by one, the services that once made everyday life possible quietly vanish. And each closure encourages even more people to leave. This is what's known as a demographic death spiral. Population decline creates fewer services. Fewer services encourage even more population decline. And every time that cycle repeats, reversing it becomes even more difficult. Today, many villages across the Serranía Celtibérica are home to fewer than 100 residents. Some only have a few dozen. Walking through them can feel strangely frozen in time. In some villages, the average age is over 65. Streets that once echoed with children are now almost silent. Entire rows of houses sit abandoned, slowly returning to nature. Here's the strange part. This region isn't cut off from the modern world at all. A high-speed train can cross the entire Serranía Celtibérica in under an hour. Drivers pass through it every day on the motorway to Zaragoza, but almost none of them stop. The infrastructure that connects Madrid to Barcelona was never built to serve the towns in between. It was built to go around them just as fast as possible. Spain didn't forget this region, it just built a way to skip it. Today, the question is no longer why people left, it's whether enough people remain to keep these communities alive at all. Many municipalities across the Serranía Celtibérica continue to lose population every year, despite government programs designed to reverse the trend. Some villages have attracted remote workers, others have promoted tourism or restored abandoned homes. But reversing decades of decline is incredibly difficult once the demographic balance has already been lost. The story of the Serranía Celtibérica isn't really about Spain, it's about what happens when geography collides with modern economics. These mountains used to shape where people could live. Then, within the space of a single generation, they shaped where people could no longer afford to stay. The heart of Spain didn't empty because anyone planned for it to. It emptied because in the modern world, some places simply became easier to leave than to stay. If you enjoyed this video and want to discover more places where geography shapes the world around us, make sure to subscribe. And if you want to see another example of a place shaped by geography, check out this video about why nobody lives along the Caribbean coast. Thanks for watching.